have about 52 attendees. So, hi everyone. Uh, Thank you for taking out some time from your busy schedule to join this webinar. I'm Kunal. I head product at Sahamati. I have with me Kanika. She is a director from the IDEO Last Mile Money Design team. Uh, Today, we'll be going through some of the design guidelines for informed consent. This webinar comes with the new DPDP Act. We are hoping that this webinar helps you understand what are the key design problems that you're looking to solve in the account aggregator domain and in the consent domain in general, and how you can build your design journeys to address these key issues. So I'm assuming everyone here is familiar with the account aggregator framework. But just to give a little bit of context, we have FIPs, FIUs, and consent managers, which are the account aggregators sitting in between the two. The role of the consent manager is to facilitate the taking of consent from the customer and allowing the FIU to access the data from the FIP through a consented manner. Since the account aggregator system ecosystem was launched, we have been growing rapidly. At this point in time, we have about 20 million successful transactions. That is, 20 million customers have been able to 20 million times data has been shared successfully between the FIU and the FIP. Uh, at this point in time, about 1.13 billion accounts are enabled through account aggregator, and it's been growing steadily at a 28% month-on-month growth rate. We have about 86 FIPs live in the ecosystem, including public sector banks, private sector banks, RRBs, small finance banks, AMCs who are live through their RTAs. We have depositories who are live, both CDSL and NSDL are live. We have pension CRAs live with us, as well as we have
Sorry, can you
general
make
insurance
it
companies.
full screen? I'm so sorry. Can you make
Sorry.
it full screen, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you
Is
so
it
much.
better now?
Yes, so much. Thanks.
Yeah. We have general 11 life and two general insurance companies also live with us, and most recently GSTN went live on the account aggregator framework. Some use cases that we have seen is in the credit underwriting and monitoring space, bank account verification, account opening for DMATs, personal finance management, pension account opening, and income estimation for life insurance and other insurance policies. So, with the passage of the DPDP Act in the Parliament recently, what this has done is that consent and privacy are now enshrined in law. One of the goals for us in this webinar is to help you understand how consent and consent managers work and how you should design consent journeys for smart and effective implementations. Key principles of the Data Protection Act are covered in the AA implementation. In fact, account aggregator is one of the implementations of the Data Protection Act in the financial services data domain. So, as we know, account aggregator journey is can be broken down into multiple steps. At each step, there is a potential for user drop off. So once a consent is raised on the FIUs, and then the customer needs to register on the account aggregators domain. There's a discovery and linking process. There is a consent process. There is the data fetch and the data fulfillment, consent fulfillment process. Now, at each of these steps, there's a potential for drop-offs. And what we've identified is that the two main reasons for this is issues that come out of the UX, where the customer is not able to understand what is the data that is being requested, or how is this being requested, how the account aggregator framework is working, or issues that arise out of the FIP performance, where the FIP's health might be down, the account might not be discoverable, because of which the journey of the customer breaks down. What we are going to do today is look at some of these key UX issues that arise, and we'll look at how to create smart journeys to mitigate these issues. We'll do a separate webinar where we'll talk about issues that arise out of the FIPs and how you can manage your journeys by using smart APIs and tools that we've created to streamline the process and ensure that when you're raising consent requests as an FIU, you are able to fulfill that request and doesn't get dropped off because of the FIP health. To start off this, we to start off the work on the UX, we set up a design review board with IDEO Last Mile Money and Sahamati. This design review board had about 50 organizations from the community that had contributed to it. Where they had interviewed 20 plus customer profiles, and they created 15 plus prototypes that were used for testing with these different customer profiles. At the end of this exercise, we came out with a design report, reference and a reference journey that people can use and build upon for their own FIU AA implementations. So I'd now like to invite Kanika from IDEO to take us through the design report that she and her team had created, along with the design review board. Kanika, over to you.
Thanks so much, Kunal. And hi, everyone. So wonderful to see so many of you here today. Um, I'm excited to share what we worked with Sahamati and other industry players on. But before doing that, just thought I'll take a quick second to introduce myself and to introduce IDEO for those of you that don't know me or IDEO. IDEO is a global design company based out of San Francisco, most popularly known for having designed the Apple products and pioneering the concept of design thinking, which is what we applied when coming up with recommendations for the account aggregator flow. And at IDEO, I lead our emerging market fintech portfolio, where I work almost like a product manager and a product strategist with product teams that are building especially financial service products, and more specifically financial services products for the long tail or next billion users. So with the boring part kind of out of the way, jumping into some of the more interesting things that I'd love to share today. Before we jump into the recommendations, wanted to just ground us in what we learned when we spoke with users and what are some design principles that kind of guided the recommendations we've put together. So what we really tried to understand is where the account aggregator flow really breaks for citizens today. The first thing we heard is that for most of them, actually, this is really not such a familiar tool. It's a new tool or new platform. And alongside that, it's almost a new idea around having control over their data. It's not something that they're used to actively thinking about or processing decisions around. And so it felt like a lot of information, and they were unsure about what to do with that information or what to make of it. There was also lower confidence and trust, by which we mean that a lot of the actions that account aggregator enables are sometimes or most often one time, I guess, actions. And so there is a preference to revert back to what you're familiar with, what you're comfortable with, what you know works, and what you believe and trust in. And so we also heard from users who said that it's a one-time thing. So even if it takes longer, it requires me to download a bunch of PDFs. I think it's safer because I don't know what it means to share all of my information digitally. We also heard that a lot of the information around what account aggregator is, what's happening when you're giving consent, what type of information you're giving consent to, it feels very overwhelming. And there's also here multiple players who kind of engage with the user at any given moment. So there is the FIU that's seeking the information, then there's the FIP that's sharing the information, and then there is the account aggregator that's kind of creating this consent framework and allowing the user to share the information. And so it's very hard for a user or a citizen to learn, make decisions, learn about account aggregator, make decisions, and take actions all at the same time. We also heard a lot around what agency really means and how it's implemented. So, there were messages around the fact that you can revoke consent, but it wasn't clear how to do it. And so people were concerned about whether it's actually possible, whether it's easy, what are the, sort of fine print terms and conditions associated with that. And finally, I kind of touched upon this, but this is to do with mental models around data consent and data sharing. So the idea of owning your data and having agency and control over it is quite alien to, in fact, most of us. We don't always actively think about it. And so it tend to create, some level of stress and anxiety around what this really means and what does it entail. So now, just having grounded you in that, where we really landed was, how might we empower citizens with an account aggregator data consent flow that provides agency and at the same time is intuitive? And the reason we added this last element around being intuitive is because we heard while we were building this from a lot of product managers that their goal was to create seamlessness and reduce friction as far as possible, to reduce drop-offs. And so it's really, the recommendations are a way for us to try and give you ideas or inspiration to balance both agency and seamlessness alongside each other. And so some of the design principles that we landed on that you'll see reflected in the recommendations is, the first one is, how do you create transparency without cognitive overload? And so it's really a fine line between providing them the right type of information and all of the information necessary in that moment, and it being too much information. And so how do you provide them information that doesn't make them feel overwhelmed or create cognitive overload? The second is, how do you create empowerment and meaningful control? So how do you surface information around key decision-making moments and specific information to make that decision more meaningful and more intentional? The third one is around trust, while creating digital and financial confidence. Most of us already know this, so I don't need to preach to the choir, but when it comes to financial transactions, the stakes are usually higher. And so therefore the need for trust is higher, but the need to feel confident around what you need to be doing in that moment, how can you, what does recourse look like if you make a mistake, is as important as digital confidence around how to use the app. And finally, going back to some of what we heard around, users not knowing what account aggregator is, or mental models around data consent and data sharing, it's important to also provide bite-sized education or more progressive education as people go through account aggregator journeys. So they build familiarity with the concept, they build familiarity with the framework, and they start to think of it as more mainstream like they now do with UPI. So jumping into the fun part of this, what we did was, what you'll see through the next few slides is a imagined embedded flow, where the FIU is money box. It's an imaginative FIU. We've named the account aggregator Ekjut. The purpose here is wealth management, and the FI categories that will be requested that you'll see are bank accounts and mutual funds. So just to show you what it could look like if you were collecting multiple categories of information. So this is all, just inspiration. And please don't treat any of these recommendations as final. We just wanted to give you a starting point and some ideas to go off of. So the first is around introducing the concept of account aggregator, which is a pretty high stake moment because it's really the moment when users make a decision to go through the journey or not. And what we realized were some of the biggest challenges for users in this moment was there was no clarity around why they should be sharing data via account aggregator versus some other form of account sharing. There was fear around misuse of data and potential risks like, will this allow you to transact on my behalf? And so there was misunderstanding around the scope of what sharing an account really meant. And so here's the recommendation of what that first screen could look like when you're introducing account aggregator. Can if you can see my cursor, the first bit that I want to highlight here, this is a fairly busy screen, so I'll keep it more specific on each of these, but feel free to drop in your questions if you have other questions. I think the big thing was people wanted to know why they need to do this before they enter this journey. Sometimes we've seen in the current journeys that this is maybe abstracted away or not clearly called out. And so how might we more explicitly call out why you need to share your account information? Call out right at the start what are the types of account information you need, but also alongside that, highlight what it is not. So the fact that this is only to analyze your account information and not to make payments from your account was actually a very important disclaimer to show right up front. To have a clear and safe call to action. And here you'll see that we've used the terminology share accounts, and we tested a bunch of different language, from share to link to connect. And actually share accounts kind of came up as the most, most relatable and one that felt most safe. Which is why we've recommended share accounts here, but we've seen the use of multiple other words at this moment. But to have a clear call to action. And then finally, without having to go into too much information, but allowing them a space to just know what account aggregator is here. And here you'll see there are a bunch of trust markers that we've again validated with users. The two trust markers that kind of bubbled up when we showed them a bunch were, does my bank approve this? Because the banker has a deep and trusted relationship with most users who are bank account holders. And so showing some of the most largest banks or banks that have most users was helpful. And this is, of course, up for interpretation of which logos to show. And then the RBI authorization. And while RBI was a trust indicator that bubbled up to the top, the bank logos kind of took precedence over that. We've also recommended here the option for people to scroll up, almost like a drawer up, if they want to read more information, where you simplify what account aggregator does. And here at the bottom, you'll see on the right-hand side screen that there is an additional trust marker, which is some kind of social proof that this is already being used. This is from some time ago, but now I think this number has multiplied many-fold. So I think it adds a lot more weight and credibility. Moving to the next big moment, which is the eligibility check. And really here, the big kind of objective was, how do we reduce frustration for those users who may not be eligible for account aggregator, either because their FIP is not yet registered, or the account aggregator that they're likely to sign up with does not have a linkage with the FIP. So how do you make sure you're able to preempt some of that? Or there are certain account types that don't qualify for within the account. One example we had when we were working was a joint account versus an individual account. And so here you'll see that we're recommending some kind of eligibility check that shows up before they go into the linkage moment, where they are prompted to share their most frequently used banks. We also recommend the ability to select multiple bank accounts, because most people do have multiple bank accounts. It's also nice here up top, you'll see that we've highlighted a red flag which calls out what account aggregator cannot support. And here at the bottom is for those banks that are not yet listed, how do you kind of include a notify nudge, so that users who want to come back later also have the option to do that. Great. So then moving on to the next one, here we've also designed a variation and of how you might actually show what kind of accounts work. So the first one is what you saw in the previous slide, but a second one is, what if these look like cards instead of small tiles? where you also have some additional level of criteria that you might need to check or assess before you put them into the journey. The third moment here is around registration or logging into account aggregator. And so the big challenges here for a citizen are really around the handoff from the FIU to the account aggregator. They may not fully understand or grok the idea of why am I moving to a new entity? What does this mean? They might not necessarily know if it's safe. And there might be some citizens who may have gone through the account aggregator flow previously, but because they don't have the mental model around account aggregator and it's not so direct to user like UPI, they might not remember their information, and so they might end up starting from scratch again. And so here, this first one is for a new citizen, so someone who does not have an account aggregator flow, but we have a recommendation in the more detailed presentation you'll see where we recommend to TSPs a way for the FIU to share some information where they can surface if this user is already an account aggregator user to avoid some of that repetition or redundancy. And so here, the big thing that we kind of recommend is showing and visually marking that there is a handoff from the FIU to the AA, and providing some more kind of credibility or stamp of approval from the FIU that the AA that they're being transferred to is one that they recommend, is a preferred partner or a partner that they, can credibly back. It's also a good idea here to maybe set some expectation of what's to come. And this is so that people know what to expect, and there are no frustrations if it's taking longer than they expected it to take. And on the right hand side here, you'll see that once they select continue, they receive an OTP, but to highlight where just above the OTP, which number they're linking to, assuming that the FIU already has access to this number. But also give them the option to edit the number if they need to. And this is possibly a moment to really highlight the help or access to help button, just in case they have questions or they want to make sure that they're following the right steps. The one thing we additionally kind of imagined here is some form of a visual marker to build an association with account aggregator. So you'll see here right at the bottom, a double A in a circle. This is just our, kind of recommendation. This is not the design that has been approved, but it is a recommendation to the industry to collectively come up with an identity for account aggregator that feels similar to the UPI logo and that can build more association, especially in moments like this. This particular variation is for, an existing user where, if possible, you pull up an account that they might already have, and maybe they have multiple accounts. So then you're also recommending to them which account you would prefer as the FIU that's going to deliver the service to them. But what's most important here that we realized in research was people tend to actually fear this moment a little bit, because suddenly you have discovered, you have connected to their phone number, and in the next screen, you are likely to connect with their bank account information. So the auto discovery moment actually feels very scary, and people tend to start feeling suspicious about how that happened. And so setting up for that next moment where their bank account information will be pulled is a good idea here, where you highlight that the mobile number is the identity that you're using to find their account aggregator information. Moving on to the next moment, which is discovering and authorizing accounts, which is probably the moment of a lot of anxiety. And especially the authorizing moment we've heard is a moment of a lot of drop off and churn. The big kind of challenges that we were hoping or trying to solve in the recommendations is, like I already mentioned, the anxiety around how your information was discovered, the cognitive overload when there is multiple institutions, multiple accounts, and multiple categories of financial information, and each of these have different types of information that are being pulled for the FIU. And then the authorization moment, which can be quite can be a moment of some frustration for users if the OTP doesn't come on time, if there are way too many OTPs. And while we cannot solve for that at this moment, we've tried to make recommendations around how to make it feel a little bit more guided. So moving on to this particular screen. So here, the way we've designed it is to think of this almost like one category at a time, and thinking of it, 2-3 principles that apply here is, one, can we guide them through the process? So can we let them know what's happening, which is what you'll see in the first screen, where the message here is that you're searching for accounts information based on their previous selection of banks so that they know what's happening. Once the bank account information shows up, giving them the option to check what is the specific information from within these accounts that is being collected or is being shared. Clearly highlighting in the call to action that this is an authorization moment and not a sharing moment, which means that it is a decision-making moment. And in the OTPs, then, having a counter for the OTP so that they know how many are left. And then moving into the next category. In the next category, if there is an additional level of verification or identity information that's required, then introducing that. But if AAs can jump straight to this moment without additional identifiers, then you can jump straight to 4.5, which is where you again introduce them to the category of information you're pulling, and then similarly what information from within those accounts, and then the authorization moment. But just to dive a little deeper into what I just shared, so letting them know that they can select the accounts that they can share. So to some degree, it is still a choice. Letting them know which category of account information they're sharing at this moment. This particular one, which is the drop down here, is something that we tested and saw was of value, which is what is the specific information you'll share, where you highlight in easy to understand language that you're sharing information of transactions over 10,000, what their current balance is, what period you're sharing that information for, but really simplifying it here. And then also giving them the option to add an account in case an account that they want to share is not here. And in the authorization moment, making sure that there is a counter, because we heard that kind of gives people something to track towards so that they know they're making progress. Showcasing which specific account they're authorizing at which moment, and also a visual progress marker, which you see here at the bottom, which is the OTP sent via CAMS. Then moving on, we think that it's very important, especially in the early days as FIP health is being improved, to think about what error screens look like and what are some negative flows when things don't go as per plan. So here, if for whatever reason accounts can't be auto-discovered, what is a way to do it manually? Can they try with a different number? Can they add an account more manually? And then in the error around OTPs, can you provide them one with with information that there is an error in connecting, but two, can you move them on to the next OTP that they need to share instead of ending the process here and having them start all the way from scratch again. The next moment is really around informed and explicit consent. And here really the big challenges are, how do we reduce while offering transparency, how do we reduce the feeling of overwhelm? There's also sometimes a feeling to get done with this because by this point they've gone through multiple steps. And so how do you ensure that in that impatience, a user is not missing important information? How do you provide them control? And how do you support them in case of a failed transaction or an incomplete transaction? So here you'll see that, we've reframed the guidelines or the consent artifacts and made it simpler in language, and organized it almost like cards, so it's easy to process. And what we really were hoping here is to shift this from a click through moment to a read through moment. And so here you are reiterating again right up top that this is the final step. So really like addressing that potential impatience that might be coming up. User-friendly terminology. But a couple of things that I wanted to highlight is this red flag you see here, where we've actually flagged off if a frequency feels very high. And this is possibly an account aggregator's prerogative in an attempt to build a more trustworthy relationship with their user. Also, the flag around how you might share or cancel, how you might cancel your share at any time. And a more deliberate call to action, which is a swipe instead of a click. And when we share this document, you can see how we've kind of used more user-friendly language for each of the consent artifacts. These are, again, screens that we've designed around the progress. So to show and signal where they're at in the journey, to maybe provide them the option to leave the app screen as it is, just a moment of authorization, and maybe that happens over time. And in case of an error, guiding citizens on how they might start again and letting them know why it might happen, if your network is busy, and providing them with notifications on a timely basis in case they need to come back and start over. And then this is something we took inspiration from, a habit that most of us anyway follow in the UPI world, where a transaction confirmation screen is really a moment to tangibly share with someone else in some instances, but also to see for yourself that it has been completed and to just celebrate success at the end of it. We've also included a form of receipt here that people can share with their own phone numbers or with someone else, so that they always have access to this, and so that they can always refer back. So it allows them, and here, these are some things that we think might be helpful in a transaction receipt or a data receipt, which is some form of a tracking mechanism, reviewing the terms again, and then maybe a nudge from account aggregator to build a more direct relationship with the user, a nudge to download the account aggregator app. We've also, recommended a decline flow at the end, which we think that if you're seeing a large number of declines towards the end, you might want to bring it before the authorization moment. But let's say the decline moment comes towards the end, then highlighting and informing the citizens, because authorization by this point would have been completed, to let them know that the selected accounts that they had shared through account aggregator are still on account aggregator, but not shared with the FIU, just in the spirit of transparency, and that they can always go to the account aggregator app to potentially delete it. Finally, I just want to quickly go through revoking consent. And so here there are a couple of things that we want to keep in mind. One is the big challenge is how do you make sure that citizens know where they can revoke consent, and how they can revoke consent, and they understand what it means. And then how do they understand the role of the account aggregator, because the revoking of consent finally happens on the account aggregator ecosystem. So how do they make sure that they know what to expect once they stop sharing accounts? And so here, when the citizen chooses to select or cancel their account sharing, we recommend a fairly large red flag, just to let them know what they might lose in the process if they cancel, which is that they may not be able to see insights for their wealth management. And then once they're in the Ekjut or account aggregator ecosystem, making the cancellation an intentional moment around the swipe, but also letting them know what it means to cancel. It means that the FIU can no longer access your information. The FIU might delete your information if those are the terms. And then finally, on the last screen, you'll see that highlighting once again that the cancellation might have happened only for one particular service, but that FIU might still have your information for another service that you might have signed up for. And so being completely transparent as the account aggregator on where else their information is being shared after they cancel one. Maybe I'll stop here. There are a bunch of design resources which I believe Ruchi and Kunal will share with you all, this deck and other stuff post this call. But let me stop screen share.
Thank you, Kanika. Thank you, Kanika. We've had a few questions here in the chats, but let's do a quick round of Q&A from the panelists, audience attendees as well. So, guys, feel free to raise your hand and ask a question, or you can type your questions in the chat here as well.
Kunal, we might want to go through the questions that have already been asked. So if you go to the Q&A section, you will see a question from Digvijay, which is open, and some others that are, answered by you, but maybe you just want to tell the audience. And then there are some in dismissed also, which could be relevant as well. So if you could just go through those.
Okay. The first question was from Nikita about the screens that are casted where the customers are selecting the preferred bank accounts. If that is a section that has to be in the AA domain, or it can be in the FIU domain. So the answer to this is that the selection of preferred bank accounts can be in the FIU domain. It's only at the time of the discovery request and the discovery responses that the customer must be redirected to the AA domain.
And I think it's that's really where you're starting the journey, right, Nikita? So it's likely to therefore be in the FIU ecosystem, because it's the first step to getting into the account aggregator journey. And we think that is possibly also a critical piece of information that the FIU can share potentially with the AA to surface the selected bank accounts instead of all the bank accounts. So it's possibly also one form of a filter to reduce the information overload at the moment of authorization.
Kanika, a question to you from Devdut here. Have you observed any differences in the user behavior for different products? For example, a lending customer versus a wealth management customer?
Yeah, I think, Kunal, I was just reading your answer. I think you're pretty right. It really depends on the urgency of the need, Devdut. But having said that, there is always that element of caution that applies across all use cases. And so if someone feels like this is too much of an invasion of my information, or this feels unsafe, irrespective of their need, they will not go through the process and they will revert to what they're familiar with, unless it's something that they cannot access offline. So sometimes in wealth management, that's not something that the larger set of users can access. And a lot of FIUs or fintechs have made that more accessible. So there is potentially more willingness. But having said that, I think it really boils down to their risk, their perception of risk in sharing the information, and sometimes less to do with the need.
Okay. Hope that answers your question, Diptu. Okay. There's a question about creating scorecards using account aggregator data, which of course is possible. As an FIU, you can use this data for underwriting, and your mechanism of underwriting can include any form of scorecards that you choose to create.
Yeah, I guess when you mean design scorecards using alternate data on AA, I think right now it's just financial information, right, Kunal? And I think
Yeah,
that's yet
it's
to come.
financial information. Now, this financial information can be, of course, your bank statements, your transactions. Plus, you can have us wait for, let's say, if it's a lending product, you can wait if the person has an insurance premium to pay or not. You can get that information from the insurance data that you fetch through account aggregator. And you can add a metric for investments that the customer is making. So you can design your scorecards the way you want to, as long as you're an authorized entity who can access the AA data. Nikita has a question about consent artifact containing the FIU and the TSP in case the TSP is also involved. Nikita, this is where the situation is a little different. The TSP is considered an agent of the FIU or the FIP, whoever that they are servicing. So the TSP acts on behalf of the FIU in this case. The entity that is authorized to take the consent is still the FIU. TSP is just a service provider to the FIU, and hence the TSP's name cannot be there in the consent artifact. The name in the consent artifact has to be that of the FIU, because FIU is the one that is authorized to access the data.
Having said that, Kunal, isn't it true that the TSP name should be present at the overall level, just so the user knows that this is the TSP through whom the information is being shared? So you're right.
Uh,
May
TSP.
not
no,
be.
I may not be. May not be.
Oh, you don't. It can be completely
A
abstracted.
TSP is just like any vendor that you can think of, and it doesn't necessarily have to be mentioned anywhere. Okay. There's a question about how AA helps reduce frauds. So, Mufaddal, a very common form of frauds that's been experienced in the banking domain, especially in the credit domain, is forged bank statements, which are very expensive to detect and very expensive to rectify. And that is why account aggregator helps a lot in this space, because the data is coming directly from the source, and it automatically reduces the scope of data, any fraud in terms of the any changes in the data, any mismatch in the data, and it allows the lenders to trust the data without having to do any form of verification, because it's coming directly from the source. Swati Vishnoy has a question, Kanika, about why not show coming steps into the intro stream. So when you're being redirected to the account aggregator, when you're selecting the account aggregator, can you show what are the steps involved in that screen as well?
That's a great question, Swati. We have recommended at least showing the amount of time. Sometimes, if you show too many steps, that might also dissuade your user, and they'd be like, oh, there are way too many steps. I don't have time. And so it is a potential drop off. It is a potential piece of information that can lead to drop off. And so maybe showing that information in a more digestible way, whether it is time or showing it optionally where they can click if they're curious, is possibly a better way to keep that information available, but not show it right up front. But it is a good idea to set some expectation around what's to come.
Uday has a question about design guide. If these, what we've discussed so far, are design guidelines, or is any of this mandatory implementation at the AA end? So, the form, the consent artifact, displaying the consent artifact, the validation of the user, the registration and validation of the user, and the discovery aspects are mandatory for the account aggregators. They can help you understand it better about how all of that is done by the account aggregator. But what we've discussed today so far is more in terms of the how you design with this rather than any imposing guidelines here itself. There's a question of discovery of AA account from FIU is live. No, FIU cannot do the discovery of accounts. Accounts have to be discovered by the account aggregator itself. There is a discussion happening about how we can enable discovery of the account aggregator users, VUAs, but that's also a theoretical concept right now. It's not live for anyone yet. Should a user be notified about their AA account ID once the account is created? Kanika?
I think yes, a user should be, which is kind of what we were driving towards with the data receipt, that they should know that they have now built a relationship with a new entity, and that they have an account. I can imagine that in the years to come, account aggregator IDs are hopefully going to feel as familiar as now UPI IDs are. It is not yet there, but it's a good idea to build that education and that mental model.
Okay. Vijayan has a suggestion here. The terms such as linking and consent approve or deny need to be standardized. Here we've used authorize instead of linking. What are your thoughts on this, Kanika?
Yeah, this is a great point, Vijayan. We also think that there should be some level of standardization. I guess that's a little bit of an industry collective decision around being willing to do that. Like we said, our recommendation is share and authorize because that's what worked in research. But maybe others like yourself who are building might have thoughts on why link or connect or approve or deny are better. But it is a recommendation that maybe this is something Kunal, Ruchi, Geeta, you all consider setting up as a small working group uh, to arrive at, because I do think it is a good idea to have it standardized.
Okay. Ashwini has a question. Many PSU banks' response is less than 50%. How to handle this so the customer trust is not so the
Um,
customer trust is not hampered as this is leading as a deterrent. So, uh, Kanika, do you want to take it up from a design point of view first?
Yeah, from a design point of view, Ashwini, I think, teething troubles are going to continue to be there for a while, just given how large and, this is being built at population scale, and, you know, the way it's being connected is also quite large. So while Kunal can answer around the FIP health, but one recommendation that we have that we're actually feel a bit strongly about is a way to let users know when there is an error, when the connection doesn't happen, and a way for them to maybe start from where they left off. So right now, you technically have to start over from scratch, but are there ways for the user to feel like they're not doing everything from scratch again and be aware and knowledgeable of why it didn't happen and how it will happen if it does?
Okay. Ashwini, also from an FIP health point of view, we have the SaaS dashboard that is measuring the health of all the FIPs in the ecosystem. We'll soon be releasing an API for the dashboard as well. And through that, you can design real-time journeys, identify if the FIP health is up and down, and you can do better communication with your customers on the journey itself. Uh, Nikita, Nikita's question is about the scorecard. Nikita, I'd recommend we connect separately after the webinar and we can discuss in detail about the scorecards. Saloni Mehta has a question. Are there any recommendations for how to proactively inform users of known issues in the data received from the chosen FIPs? So, Saloni, that's a good point. We have been observing a few commonly found issues with the FIPs that are they're live in the ecosystem. We are still working on a mechanism to let the customers know about this. We don't have a centralized mechanism at this point in time. In terms of health issues, the FIP health is available publicly that you can use the SaaS APIs once they're live later in the month, early in the month of October. That can be used for informing the customers of the FIP health. But once the data is received, the quality of data and what's wrong with that is something we've not been able to figure out yet. We are still working on that.
I
Yeah,
think
one point to add here is, sorry, Kanika, one point to add here is there has been increasingly, there has been an ask from the community saying that they would want to have a group that can converge on what can be the common messaging that can be, so that the customer is not confused between different messages they see on different apps. So that's one thing we plan to do also in the near future. I will definitely send out the invites to relevant cohorts there. That's on the cards. That's one thing.
Geeta said what I wanted to. I think if you're going to be telling the user that something is not right with the information they received, I think that should feel like either they should know what to do about it, or if they don't know what to do about it, you should let them know what's happening with it, and it should be more standardized so there is a learning around what that means.
Okay. There's a question about AA ecosystem and the role it would play in the expansion of credit over UPI by banks. This is something which is happening in the industry. If you have to do great underwriting, you need access to data, and yes, AA ecosystem can play a big role here, but that also depends upon what kind of underwriting mechanisms and what kind of protocols that lenders are going to be working on before we can say anything with any we can make any more concrete claims here at this point in time. From the perspective of the DPDP Act, which is considered a data fiduciary, the FIU or the AA? So the data fiduciary in the DPDP Act is the person who is accessing the data, and this in this domain in the account aggregator scenario, the FIU has access to the data. The data A is a pass-through mechanism, and A is never actually get access to that data. So the FIU is the one that's considered a data fiduciary, and the account aggregator is considered a consent manager.
Uh,
Who's res-
we also have
Sorry.
Swati who has raised her hand. Maybe we can just allow her to ask.
Yeah.
Swati, can you hear us? Swati
Yeah,
Vishnoy?
yeah, hello.
Yes, Swati, you can ask your question here.
Yeah, my first question has been answered. It was on that design thing that why can't we show the next steps? I mean, is it not logical to show what's coming? So that has been answered.
Okay.
And my other question was on how to manage the OTP screen design wise when we are taking multiple OTPs. Like if the use case is where the user has selected multiple banks in one go, and multiple OTPs then have to come from various banks. So how to like smartly play around with the screen, because it might happen that the first screen, like so let's say user has given access for Axis Bank and HDFC both, but the HDFC OTP is not coming, and Axis Bank OTP has come. So like how to play around with the screens there.
Yeah, this is a great question, Swati, and it's actually another big drop-off moment that we heard from users. I think right now, given that we can't do a one OTP for all accounts from one bank, the way we are recommending it is one that you have the ticker on top, so folks know how many accounts that they need to share OTPs for. The second is you highlight which OTP you're seeking, so that when they get the SMSs, maybe they get it quickly one after the other, and if it auto like shows up on the screen, they can make sure they verify that it is from the right account. And then finally, if they don't receive it, giving them the option to move on to the next OTP without holding them just because the first one didn't come. So allowing them that option, though I don't know if that is technically feasible at this moment. but that is a recommendation so that at least one or two of the 3 or 4 accounts, at least those get linked, and that one OTP doesn't hold you back from everything else.
Swati, does that answer your question?
Yeah, in a bit.
I think this is also something we're all going to learn how to navigate, because I think there has to be a more efficient way
Yeah.
to get all the OTPs.
I mean, this is the only reason why we at One Card have initially started allowed user only to choose one bank at a time. So I just wanted to understand how it is being done, like in the industry. So, yeah. Cool, but yeah, thanks.
Okay. Nihar has a question about who's responsible for building the design flows that we've discussed today. Is it the FIU or the AA? So, Nihar, more often than not, what we've observed is that the FIUs and AAs choose to co-create the journeys, to choose to co-create the design in the user flow. And that is why what we've shown today is applicable to both the FIU and the AA. There are certain aspects like the discovery, the linking, and the consent acceptance that has to happen in the AA client domain, while the selection of selection of preferred bank accounts or the preferred account aggregator, the redirection of the user and handoff onto the A client has to happen in the FIU domain. Since FIUs prefer a connected journey where to avoid moments of shock for the user, where the entire look and feel of the solution changes completely. FIUs and AAs choose to co-create these journeys, and hence it's important that both of them are aware of the key principles that are being discussed here today. Shivam has a question. Can we share some of the good practices related to design of UX and UI?
Uh, if you mean beyond what we've shared today, Shivam, IDEO has recently launched the financial confidence playbook. I'll just drop it in chat. That has also a whole bunch of recommendations on what good design looks like, and more specifically, what does good design look like when you're designing for financial products.
Nehar has a question around something that's mentioned on the Sahamati website. All FIUs need to be connected to all AAs. So, Nehar, the whole point of an FIU collecting to multiple AAs is a recommendation from the industry that the user, the customer at the end of the day, must have a choice to go through with whichever A that they want, and their choice of A should not be a deterrent in them accessing a financial service. That's why it is recommended that all FIUs should connect with all the account aggregators that are out there. Are there any reference designs for GST FIP? Any thoughts on how to handle OTPs getting triggered on multiple mobile numbers against GSTs in different states? So, Kanika, we've seen the FIPs where the mobile number we've assumed is a single mobile number, but in case of GST, there'll be multiple mobile numbers and multiple OTPs will get triggered on multiple mobile numbers. So, how do you suggest we design for that?
So one thing we've recommended is, though I don't know whether that would technically work here, which is the option to change the phone number, but I guess then the authorization is again linked to that phone number. So if it's technically possible to receive an OTP on one number, but input it while you're on another number, that's possibly the best way to do it. But as a design recommendation, what would be important here is to highlight and let the user know that they should expect the OTP from a different number, or the OTP has gone to a different number. So letting the user know where to look for the OTP is probably an important design consideration here when there are multiple phone numbers that they might have to input OTPs from.
So, Kanika, there's another question about how to link more accounts. We've looked at a scenario where a customer has gone on to the AA domain, they've discovered accounts and they've linked those accounts. But let's say now the customer chooses to link more accounts, or customer had already linked a few accounts, now they want to link a couple more accounts. How would we design for that?
Yeah, I want to think of it a little bit like the revoke or cancel initiation moment, where can they go back to their consent screen in their profile information and add more information. Maybe that the prompt to go to that space, it comes from a nudge within the app or an in-app message or a SMS. So something outside of the app or when they're on the app of the FIU should nudge them to add that information, and then they go back to the consent profile page and then they initiate that journey. That's what I'm thinking about, though I haven't thought fully about this because we haven't fully thought about that option.
Okay. Nikita has a question. So customers have a choice to select A that are casted on the screen. Yes, Nikita, customers have a choice to select whichever A that they want to work with. And the goal of the ecosystem is to ensure that everybody works towards this as an outcome. And hence we recommend FIUs should integrate with all the account aggregators.
The only thing I'll add here, Nikita, is if the user has an account already in one of the account aggregators, we recommend letting the user, kind of reminding the user that they have the account with that account aggregator, should they choose not to go through the registration process again.
Rishabh has a question about how would the flow work if I have multiple bank accounts with different mobile numbers linked to each other. Will I have to add different accounts with different numbers and with a fresh flow every time? So, Rishabh, this is a solved problem in the AA domain. Irrespective of what mobile number your VOA gets created on the account aggregator, they do allow you an option to enter an alternative mobile number and select accounts from that as well, link accounts from that as well.
You'll just have to probably be careful in the OTP moment once again to make sure that the user knows where to look for the OTP.
Yeah. Okay, so we've answered all the questions. If there are any other questions, please feel free to ask.
I just wanted to maybe take a moment to say thank you to everyone for having me. It's been wonderful.
Thanks, Kanika. And I think we started on time and also completed on time. It's heartening to see that. Yeah. Is there a mobile handle? I think that's addressed, right? Is it always mobile@A handle?
It's not necessarily, right? AAs have a choice how they can create it.
We've put in our email ID. If you have any further questions, please write to us at info@sahamati.org.in. It is in the chat box for everyone to view. The recording of this session, along with a short blog post and the presentation, will be available in the next few days on our website, and we will socialize it on our handles as well. Thank you very much for your
A little
time.
bit
Thanks.
Ruchi, a little bit of promotion here. We are on YouTube, we are on Twitter, we are on Insta. So please, LinkedIn. So please do subscribe to us, and then you'll get all the updates, latest news, everything about AA. Yeah, I did my plugin.
Thank you, Kanika, for your time so much, for sharing your knowledge and your work that you all have done together. And thank you, Kunal, as always. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.